Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lemorack, and today I am once again playing Kerbal Space Program, continuing the playthrough in which I intend to visit every single major planet, let's say, in the Kerbal system before we end up on the brink of the release of Kerbal Space Program 2, which I cannot wait for. Today we're going to get some of the easy stuff out of the way. Specifically on the docket for this episode, I am going to be visiting all of the astral bodies surrounding Kerbin, which are, of course, the Moon. Alternative pronunciation includes the Mun. And Minmus, arguably the easier of the two targets. We're starting out with the Moon, and to do this, just to kind of spice things up a bit and make it not like every other moon landing that I have performed in the past. This is one that I've done multiple times. I'm going to be doing it with a lunar station. I'm going to put a station in the orbit of the moon. We're going to have the station support a science team for potential landings in the future, as well as a giant fuel tank so that the attached lander can go multiple times. You've already seen the construction of the single launch space station. It's nothing special, it's just it's more of a little orbital outpost, really. It's got a little living quarters, it's got a giant fuel tank, and it's got a lander attached. And that's really all that the station really needs. Nothing particularly interesting about the launch itself. We're going on a Saturn-sized rocket with Saturn-style engines. The launch itself, about as bog standard as it gets. Just waiting until we get about 45 degrees before I start. Rather get to a 45-degree angle as soon as possible with my recently more aggressive gravity turns. This spacecraft is not a recoverable one like the other ones. I'm still on a mission to try and minimize my, and by minimize I mean eliminate the amount of debris that I leave in orbit. But I completely expect to mess up every now and then. Also, I want to recover as many as I possibly can. It's a lot of work, really, to specifically design vessels that you can recover. If I was good at making SSTOs, it would make the whole thing that much more easy, but I'm not, so I can't. But I'm pretty good at landing rockets. I have some practice in that particular field. But I don't think I've ever built a Saturn-sized recoverable booster, and this is not going to be the first time I try that. Anyway, all of the bits of this rocket just simply fall back down into the atmosphere of the planet. And there we have the space station. Everything that you're seeing, by the way, right now is at it's accelerated to 2 times speed. That one stage on the back of it is going to be enough to put it into lunar orbit, and then we're gonna crash that stage into the lunar surface when we're done with it. But anyway, as far as like recovering, like fully recoverable stages on these rockets are concerned, I kind of prefer to use them on the spacecraft that are going to be used multiple times, right? Like, we're only ever launching a space station once. We're not gonna be repeatedly sending multiple space stations to the moon, but we are probably going to be sending multiple spacecraft to the moon. So for the spacecraft that carry crew in between various points in Kerbin and the Kerbin system, it's probably worth using, since those vessels usually are smaller anyway. We'll see how that goes. I can promise some recovered things in this episode. I will also spoil the ending a little bit and claim that the space shuttle makes another return. It's because I love space shuttles so much. We're approaching our lunar perigee. In the meantime, it's not a perigee if it's around the moon, is it? Approaching our periapsis rather, around the moon. Forgive me, I am recording this at a moment when I'm really tired. But I don't really have much other time, and I want to get this done by the arbitrary Tuesday date that I have set for myself. So the space station is going to be put on a relatively low 17-kilometer altitude. It's going to be its parking orbit. I'm not sure orbital decay luckily is not something that you have to deal with in Kerbal Space Program. Be interesting to see if it was there in KSP2. Anyway, in the meantime, we can watch the deorbiting of the, let's call it the transfer stage. just going to crash it into the surface of the moon. It's going to be hilarious because the engine actually takes up most of the force of the landing. You're going to get to watch the top half of the fuel tank do another beautiful stunt in space. Anyway, here we go. Some beautiful lunar vistas as it happens, and there we get to watch this as well. Can imagine the remaining fuel in there is probably solidified by that point. And there we go. I didn't make any vow not to pollute the surfaces of planets, but let's leave the station in this beautiful end screen shot here. Just before I take one of my previous spacecrafts, the one that I very creatively named the Drake, and I modify it for lunar flight, which basically just means I remove the hitchhiker crew pod, and I replace it with a fuel tank, add some extra fuel to the main rocket itself, and then this is actually a fully recoverable rocket. You know what? I take that back. The previous version of this was a fully recoverable vessel, but this particular version of it is not, because that fuel tank, I believe, we're not going to be recovering. Everything else we will. This is going to be the rocket that I'm going to land, by the way. It's going to be super cool. In case you hadn't watched my previous videos, it is possible to do a fully recoverable flight without using the quick save, quick load functions to, pretend like you recovered them. You can actually recover everything. It's useful for career mode, but you have to time it properly. The way I usually do it is on a relatively large inclined gravity turn, I send the full vessel up to an apoapsis of 90 kilometers before I detach the main booster and start the boost back burn. If you have Kerbal Engineer, which is the only mod I'm using for this playthrough, then by clicking the little land info button, you can see it there on the right, then it'll give you that nice little target indicator, which is important because it'll show you where your vessel is going to land, accounting for the atmospheric drag. And then once you set it to the proper landing angle, then you switch back to the vessel, right? Now the rocket is still below its apoapsis, so it's still climbing a bit. And in the meantime, we perform this orbital burn. Just barely enough to get it into a stable orbit. That's literally all you want to do with this, because you want to switch back to your booster as soon as you possibly can. Preferably while it's still in space, because I don't think... This might have changed since last I played, but it might... I don't think that Kerbal Space Program allows you to switch back to vessels that are in the atmosphere, or like in imminent danger of crashing or something like that. So you do this just until you get up into a stable orbit. In this case, I left that stage behind on a 25-kilometer periapsis, just so that it would eventually end up crashing into the surface of the planet. And then while we're still on time, switch back to the main booster. Make sure that yaw and pitch are enabled for the air brake, so you have some level of aerodynamic control. It's not nearly as good as what you could do with a SpaceX-style grid fin. And I also kind of undershot it. You can actually make some minimal target corrections just by using aerodynamic forces if you want to. Also make sure you have plenty of monopropellant fuel, because you're going to need it to control the body of the spacecraft. The landing info panel in Flight Engineer also gives you a countdown to the suicide burn that you need. I don't necessarily use it. I like to... The minimum amount of delta V that you need in order to perform a successful landing is around 250 meters per second worth. I like to have 600 just because I like to not crash. Anyway, there we have the recovered booster. It was a pretty smooth landing, all things considered. And the other vessel is up there in space. We're going to perform a translunar injection burn right there. We're using the Wolfhound engine on this stage, as you can see, which is a very good, both efficient and high-powered. It's in most aspects, I think, is better than the Poodle, and the Poodle is usually the stage you use on Rockomax size engines when you're out in vacuum. But the Wolfhound is usually has the same amount of delta V, but it has a better thrust to weight ratio, so it's just a better engine in my view. I'm sure there are situations in which it's not, and I'm probably not right about that at all, and just the surface level numbers. Anyway, we make it to the moon. We perform a retrograde burn in order to put ourselves into lunar orbit. And also simultaneously see if we can't immediately get ourselves an encounter with the space station. This Drake, by the way, is carrying the crew. I believe I have one Kerbal on the space station currently, just making sure that it's, you know, making sure all the lights are on. Eating all of the snacks as necessary. Just a little bit of orbital adjustment there so that we can get ourselves a nice close encounter. And then pretty soon we should be jumping straight to the. Yep, there we are, straight to the rendezvous. And yeah, I cut out the approach this time. That might have been a mistake, but it's the same thing as always. You know, once you start to approach the space station, you slow down, adjust your trajectory so that you're flying at the same pace as it is, and then right now we're going to finish the docking maneuver to the Lunar Space Station. There we go. Some beautiful images. Click. There we are. And so the next stage is that we take the crew who is in that crew pod, we transfer them into the lunar lander, which I, afterwards realized that I didn't put any electrical, I put no batteries on it, and I put no solar panels either, so we gotta hope that we make it just on its power. Again, you're seeing a lot of cuts here. Not a lot of, leaving out a lot of the boring bits. So this is when we're already super close to the spot that we've chosen for landing. We're going to land inside this crater. Hopefully on not too steep of an incline. You can see me very nervously tapping up and down because the Terrier engine is pretty weak compared to the full weight of this craft. So you got to slow down well in advance. Upside is that you can perform the landing with a lot less fuel. And there we have it. Kerbals are going to now get out and do the most important thing, which is to plant a flag so that we can actually prove that we have been out here. There we go. Jeb with his flag planting. And then once all of the EVA things have been done, once we've collected rocks and taken all the pictures and the selfies on the moon, and we turn our spacecraft back towards space, as we get a beautiful Earthrise that I probably was too busy flying the spacecraft to notice, but it was a very pretty Earthrise, or Kerbin rise rather in this case. And then the procedure is once again the same. First you get up into lunar orbit, and then there we go, lunar orbit achieved. Well, not yet, but very soon. Then rendezvous and docking, and then we take the guys back from the put them back into the Drake, into the little spacecraft that brought them here, and then usually a single burn is enough to take them back home. We had a lot more Delta V than was necessary. Honestly, another thing that I probably could have done is I could have taken some of the fuel in the fuel if I was, going for super min-maxi. But I don't actually plan to do any more lunar landings in this playthrough. Just this one. So. But I still like to build the station as if there was an actual space infrastructure under construction here, so that if people actually did want to come back to the moon and perform multiple landings, and maybe, visit other sites, collect scientific data from other places, or, bring tourists along, then it could be possible. This little setup, it's very minimalistic. There's no, science bay on it or anything. I don't necessarily usually put science bays on lunar research stations just because it's... the moon is pretty close by, and you might as well just take all of your science data back to Kerbin with you. It's really not that big of a deal. It's more important when you start visiting other planets because transit time in between, interplanetary targets tends to take a little bit longer. And yeah, there I go, accidentally fast forwarding a little bit too far, but that's okay. We're going to perform our deorbit burn, rather our escape burn. That is simultaneously an escape from the moon and also a descent burn towards the surface of the Earth, right? Because the direction that I am accelerating is both speeding up our lunar orbit and slowing down our Kerbin orbit. And then here's our approach of Kerbin itself. Again, I cut out a lot of the boring drifting through space, and then just because I still have 600 meters per second of fuel left in the stage, I will burn it all just to slow us down. There's not really any point in doing this, but you might as well. This a spaceship, space capsule of this size can very easily survive atmospheric re-entry, even if it's ballistic. If you just put a heat shield on the bottom of it, isn't really any altitude that your pods can't survive. I'm sure I'm wrong there too, but it's never happened to me before. We have our 3 excited Kerbonauts who have just returned from the surface of the moon. Actually, I think we've left Jebediah behind, didn't we? But that's okay. We'll pick him up sometime in the future, because we don't want Jebediah missing out on all of the cool interplanetary targets. I'm biased toward Valentina. Usually in all my Kerbal Space Program playthroughs, Valentina's the one who does all the first stuff. She's my first Kerbal in space, my first Kerbal to orbit, my first Kerbal to land on every astral body that I possibly can. It's because I really like her so much, but that's okay. I know that we tend to prefer Jeb. Okay, and here we are with the space shuttle. I got the idea to bring the space shuttle into this playthrough. I'm not even sure when, but in one of my previous videos I remember mentioning that the space shuttle actually had enough Delta V to get to the moon, and I figured if it has enough to get to the moon, it has enough to get to Minmus. And so my idea was, it's something I've done in the past in playthroughs I didn't record, is to put a lander inside the space shuttle, carry it all the way out to whatever astral body I want to land on, and then, do an Apollo-style mission where the space shuttle is the command pod, which means that you actually get to bring the lander back with you. But you probably noticed that I didn't make a video of the construction of the lander, and that's because it never actually gets used, and you'll see why once we get to Minmus. I think it's pretty easy to figure out what the reason is, but I'm going to keep it secret for now. Anyway, we get to see a nice little space shuttle launch here. I love space shuttle launches. Just aesthetically, the space shuttle is such a pleasing spacecraft. The side booster separation, we saw it there a second ago. Then once we're at apoapsis, again, the space shuttle accelerates. Here's something that I'm not entirely sure about, and if you know, I'd love to know in the comments. When I do a course calculation, right? When I use the game's built-in system to help you calculate a burn direction and delta V, does it take the nose or the cockpit of the ship as its directional indicator, or the center of thrust? Because the two in this case are not the same, right? The space shuttle's nose is not pointing in the direction that the center of thrust is. So I always, just to be on the safe side, I always point my ship's nose a little bit higher than the little blue dot on the nav ball, just to be sure. Anyway, we're actually going to take the fuel tank with us, because there's enough fuel in the fuel tank to help us with the transorbital injection burn, which is pretty cool. And then in order to, keep true to our mission of not leaving debris in space, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my space shuttle on a collision course with the moon. If I go losing control, as the fuel drains from the fuel tank, right? The center of mass shifts, and so, So anyway, we're gonna leave ourselves there in a collision course with the moon. Very soon right now. There I am calculating it, and then very soon I think I'm actually just going to use the RCS thrusters, because the delta V requirement for that burn is just so low that I might as well just do it that way. But I might not. No, I use the thrusters. Okay, so there we go. That's a course that's bound to crash into Minmus, and this is where we separate the fuel tank. So this way the fuel tank ends up crashing into the surface of Minmus, and then we use the space shuttle's engines to get out of the crash, of the trajectory crashing into Minmus, so that we can make sure that the space shuttle doesn't get destroyed on the mission. But the fuel tank is going to very safely crash into the surface of Minmus. Anyway, here we are on our approach to Minmus. I think this is just about the point where I realize that there is still so much delta V left in that craft that I might as well just perform the landing with the shuttle. Why not? I mean, it was not built for it. I don't have, like, usually if you want to land a space shuttle on the surface of something, then you're going to want to have some very powerful RCS thrusters by its nose so that you can kind of tip it up and down. In this case, I figured this is Minmus. The gravity is extremely low, which means that we should be pretty safe. It's a very slow landing approach, so I apologize for that. We should see a cut very soon. And I'm looking at my timeline right now, so we're not actually going to see a cut very soon. We are going to see a speed up, though. So here we are, approaching the surface. The nuclear engines are very slow at slowing down the spacecraft, so got to make sure you're burning well in advance. And I have a little landing indicator on, so not sure we need that in this case because it's a big flat area. We pretty much know where we're going to touch down. But my idea here is to slow the spacecraft down to a very slow speed, and then just above the surface, right? Like just when we're close enough, then we suddenly tip the ship downward and then let the landing wheels take up the brunt of the impact. And look at that, there's still a lot of delta V left. Admittedly, a lot of it is going to be used up when we return to Kerbin, because this is not just going to be a simple, you know, drop the shuttle in the atmosphere thing. We're going to have to aim for the runway. And there we go, we have our little landing. And again, our Kerbals take some time to walk on the surface and plant some flags. Plant a flag, rather. There's a full crew on here, but I honestly just got a little bit too lazy to get them all out. And the RCS thrusters are not exactly strong enough to lift the ship up. Still going to try nonetheless. This takes quite a while for it to pick up some speed, but you know, almost exactly like an airplane, we take off and we start flight. I was worried that we were going to end up bumping into those hills on the far side, because you see we're not really gaining speed all that quickly. Again, more than enough delta V, plenty to get into orbit, plenty to get back to Kerbin and even perform a precision landing at KSC. But none of that's going to matter if I end up hitting those hills. So fortunately, all we really need in this case is a little bit of an upwards burn. I think we come close. Yeah, I skipped past it. So again, it's another orbital burn. It's the same thing we did around the moon. And then as we approach Kerbin, we're going to perform 2 burns. So this landing is going to occur in like 2 segments. First, we slow down to a circular orbit, or as much as we can. And then once we're at a slow enough speed, then we target KSC. Second retrograde burn, again, we cut that bit out. And now we're just going to land. Going to get to watch another space shuttle landing. Going through the atmosphere, make sure everything is nice and controlled. I turn on the landing bit just to see where I'm going to end up. Don't think it really matters when you're flying an aerodynamic vessel, because I'm not sure how the drag is calculated by that land button, but yep, it's another space shuttle landing. There's plenty of these in the previous 2 episodes of this series, in which I build the space station around Kerbin to facilitate further space travel, which we haven't ironically used in this playthrough. But I intend to immediately once we start going to other planets, starting with Duna, I think, which is going to be my first target. In the meantime, let's go ahead and watch another really cool space shuttle landing. This is another reason that I like the space shuttle. It's just something about seeing a space plane landing on a runway, like in, you know, an everyday jet engine or jet aircraft, that just appeals to me, you know, makes space flight look easy. Beautiful touchdown, deploy the parachutes, and we're back on Kerbin successfully. I would like to part with these beautiful images of the surface of the moon. Any second now. There we go. Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Please take some time to provide me feedback to this video by either liking or commenting, and pick one of these selected videos that you see on your screen right now. Thank you very much for being with me again, and I hope to see you in further installments of this series. So long.